If you are a Seahawks fan, your heart is set on that Sunday afternoon game, and not in the casual way that football fans everywhere look forward to kickoff. No, this is deeper, heavier, almost primal, because when the schedule turns towards September and the lights of the NFL flicker back on, you don't just watch, you hold your breath. And this season in particular, you feel like every single snap carries with it the weight of a question the franchise has been asking for almost a decade now. Can the Seahawks reclaim an identity that once made them the bullies of football, the team that quarterbacks dreaded, the defense that dictated everything from the first whistle to the last? And the place where that identity either reemerges or crumbles is in the pass rush, which is why this weekly ritual we call Pass Rush Friday has grown into something far bigger than a statistic update. It has become a weekly referendum on the very soul of Seattle football. Because when you measure pressures, not just sacks, not just flashy highlights, but pressures, the ghostly fingerprints defenders leave on plays that don't make the box score, you are really measuring whether the Seahawks have the kind of defense that can suffocate opponents or whether they are still a step too slow, a player too short, a heartbeat behind the rhythm of the league. And so we start here with suspense, with the unknown, with fans remembering how last season unraveled in moments that had nothing to do with touchdowns or interceptions, but everything to do with the absence of disruption. The image of Josh Allen standing clean in the pocket, untouched for 4 quarters, picking apart Seattle's defense like a surgeon, lingers like a nightmare, a reminder that pressure isn't optional in today's NFL, it's oxygen. And without it, the defense suffocates. That's why when we sit down on Fridays to track pressures, we aren't just filling in numbers on a spreadsheet, we're piecing together a mystery, trying to see whether this year's investments, trades, and coaching hires are building a weapon or assembling another disappointment. And if you lean in closer, if you listen to the way coaches talk, you realize that this isn't just tactical, it's psychological. A quarterback who feels comfortable becomes dangerous. A quarterback who feels hurried becomes vulnerable. And that thin line is where seasons swing. And here's where the narrative sharpens because the Seahawks have spent the offseason rearming themselves for this very battle, pouring money into Leonard Williams, betting on Byron Murphy to slide into a new role, holding their breath on Uchenna Nwosu's health, daring Boy Mafe to transform potential into dominance in a contract year, and handing Mike McDonald the keys to a defense that was crying out for identity. And yet, for all the moves, for all the names, the suspense doesn't fade, it deepens. Because until the ball is snapped, all of it is just theory, just projections, just hope masquerading as certainty. And that's what makes this so gripping for fans. Because Pass Rush Friday is not cumulative, it's not about the season as a whole, it's about the week to week heartbeat, the rhythm of whether this team is maintaining pressure or letting it slip, whether they are building consistency or revealing fragility, whether they are putting together the kind of defense that can stand up in December and January or one that falls apart in November. Consider Draymond Jones last season, a player criticized for not stacking sacks, but whose steady pressures, invisible to many, were the only thing keeping Seattle afloat when Nwosu was sidelined and Murphy was quiet. His work in collapsing pockets without the glory of sacks reminds us that pressures matter in ways fans often overlook. And so this year, when we talk about Leonard Williams, maybe not matching his career year, but still projecting for 25 pressures, or Byron Murphy's ceiling being dependent on whether he's lined up at 3 tech or nose, we aren't just playing with numbers. We're dealing with the fragile architecture of a defense that has to hold, or everything else collapses. Because remember, coverage and rush are married. If the rush doesn't arrive, the coverage cracks. And if the coverage cracks, the game spirals. And that marriage is where Seattle has been living on the edge for years. Think about the Legion of Boom era. The reason Richard Sherman could bait quarterbacks, the reason Earl Thomas could range sideline to sideline, the reason Cam Chancellor could play downhill like an enforcer was because the front never let quarterbacks breathe. Michael Bennett, Cliff Avril, Chris Clemens, they made quarterbacks hurry, and that made the secondary legendary. Strip away the pressure, and the mystique dissolves, which is exactly what has haunted Seattle since. That's why Mike McDonald is here, the young defensive architect from Baltimore, a man who doesn't believe in waiting for stars to save him, who believes instead in disguise, in pressure by committee, in blurring the lines so quarterbacks can't find comfort. And that philosophy now has to prove itself in Seattle. He will send corners, he will unleash safeties, he will mix fronts, and he will bet that confusion is as deadly as speed. But again, until we see it on the field, it's all theory. And that's what makes these Fridays so tense. Will the numbers confirm that McDonald's blueprint is working? Or will they expose another season of excuses? And so we go deeper. Linebackers projected for 12 pressures, led by Ernest Jones, an elite blitzer in Los Angeles, now tasked with a role that may not feature blitzing as much as his talent suggests. Tyrese Knight with 5, a rookie hungry to prove he belongs. Each snap a test of his instincts. Edge rushers with the heaviest burden. Boy Mayfair projected for 31, his contract year looming like a judge's gavel. Uchenna Nwosu scaled back to 20 because of injury. DeMarcus Lawrence penciled in for 23 disruptions, even if his sack count stays modest. Derek Hall positioned to feast in passing situations, despite his struggles against the run. Each of them a thread in the larger fabric of whether this defense becomes feared or forgotten. Add in the secondary. Devin Witherspoon blitzing occasionally from the slot despite moving outside. Tariq Woolen perhaps being sent once all season. Safeties like Julian Love and Nick Emenwarai projected for sneaky contributions off the edge. And you start to see a defense that may not have one superstar wrecking ball, but one that, if McDonald's plan works, could generate pressure from every angle, every level, like water seeping through cracks until the dam bursts. And yet, here comes the dread. What if it doesn't? What if the pressures stall at 9 a game instead of 12? What if Williams regresses harder than expected? What if Mayfair doesn't take the leap, or Nwosu's injury lingers, or Lawrence's disruption doesn't translate to results? Suddenly, the suspense becomes horror. Because the Seahawks have bet everything on this pressure identity, and without it, they are exposed. Their investments wasted. Their season hanging on the wrong side of coin flips. That's why fans can't shake the suspense. Why every Friday feels like a detective story. Because you're always waiting for the twist, the reveal, the number that tells you whether this season's Seahawks are finally, after years of drifting, building a defense worthy of their past. And so, as we sit here, on the edge of week 1, looking at projections that total 198 pressures, just shy of the mythic 200, we hold our breath. Because those numbers are more than numbers. They are a dare, a challenge to history, a promise that this team is ready to choke the air out of opposing offenses. And yet, until Sunday comes, they are nothing but words on paper. That is where the suspense lies. In the gap between projection and reality. Between hope and heartbreak, between what the Seahawks want to be and what they actually are. And in that space, in that weight, in that tension that refuses to loosen, is where you as a fan live, counting down the hours to kickoff, knowing that when the whistle blows, when the first third down arrives, when the quarterback drops back, you'll know in an instant whether this year's Seahawks are predators or prey. And until then, all you can do is wait, wonder, and hope that Pass Rush Friday reveals not another disappointment, but the rebirth of a defense that once made the league tremble. Go Hawks.